Some societies center on social control, others on social investment. Social control societies put substantial resources into police, prisons, surveillance, immigration enforcement, and the military. Their purpose is to utilize fear, punishment, and violence to divide people and keep the status quo in place, perpetuating the systemic oppression of Black and brown people and benefiting no one but wealthy elites. Social investment societies, on the other hand, put more resources into healthcare, education, affordable housing, jobless benefits, and children. Their purpose is to free people from the risks and anxieties of daily life and give everyone a fair shot at making it. Donald Trump epitomizes the former. He calls himself the law and order president. He even wants to sic the military on Americans protesting horrific police killings.
Today, I have strongly recommended to every governor to deploy the National Guard in sufficient numbers that we dominate the streets.
Trump is the culmination of 40 years of increasing social control in the United States and decreasing social investment, a trend which, given the deep-seated history of racism in the United States, falls disproportionately on Black people, indigenous people, and people of color. Spending on policing in the United States has almost tripled from $42.3 billion in 1977 to $114.5 billion in 2017. America now locks away 2.2 million people in prisons and jails. That's a 500% increase from 40 years ago. The nation now has the largest incarcerated population in the world. Immigration and customs enforcement has exploded. More people are now in ICE detention than ever in its history. Total military spending in the U.S. has soared from $437 billion in 2003 to $935.8 billion this fiscal year. The more societies spend on social controls, the less they have left for social investment. More police means fewer social services. American taxpayers spend $107.5 billion more on police than on public housing. More prisons means fewer dollars for education. In fact, America is now spending more money on prisons than on public schools. 15 states now spend $27,000 more per person in prison than they do per student. As spending on controls has increased, spending on public assistance has shrunk. Fewer people are receiving food stamps. Outlays for public health have declined. America can't even seem to find money to extend unemployment benefits during this pandemic. Societies that skimp on social investment end up spending more on social controls that perpetuate violence and oppression. This trend is a deep-seated part of our history. The United States began as a control society. Slavery, America's original sin, depended on the harshest conceivable controls. Jim Crow and redlining continued that legacy. But in the decades following World War II, the nation began inching toward social investment. The Civil Rights Act, the Voting Rights Act, the Fair Housing Act, and substantial investments in health and education. Then, America swung backward to social control. Since Richard Nixon declared a war on drugs, 4 times as many people have been arrested for possessing drugs as for selling them. Of those arrested for possession, half have been charged with possessing cannabis for their own use. Nixon's strategy had a devastating effect on Black people that is still felt today. A Black person is nearly 4 times more likely to be arrested for cannabis possession than a white person, even though they use it at similar rates. Bill Clinton put 88,000 additional police on the streets and got Congress to mandate life sentences for people convicted of a felony after 2 or more prior convictions, including drug offenses. This so-called 3 strikes you're out law was replicated by many states, and yet again disproportionately impacted Black Americans. In California, for instance, Black people were 12 times more likely than white people to be incarcerated under three strikes laws until the state reformed the law in 2012. Clinton also reformed welfare into a restrictive program that does little for families in poverty today. Why did America swing back to social control? Part of the answer has to do with widening inequality. As the middle class collapsed and the ranks of the poor grew, those in power viewed social controls as cheaper than social investment, which would require additional taxes and a massive redistribution of both wealth and power. Meanwhile, politicians whose power depends on maintaining the status quo used racism, from Nixon's, quote, law and order, and Reagan's, quote, welfare queens, to Trump's blatantly racist rhetoric, to deflect the anxieties of an increasingly overwhelmed white working class. It's the same old strategy. So long as racial animosity exists, the poor and working class won't join together to topple the system that keeps so many Americans in poverty and Black Americans oppressed. The last weeks of protests and demonstrations have exposed what's always been true. Social controls are both deadly and unsustainable. They require more and more oppressive means of terrorizing communities, and they drain resources that would ensure Black people not only survive, but thrive. This moment calls on us to relinquish social control and ramp up our commitment to social investment. It's time we invest in affordable housing and education, not tear gas, batons, and state-sanctioned murder. It's time we invest in keeping children fed and out of poverty, not putting their parents behind bars. It's time to defund the police and invest in communities. We have no time to waste.